Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
And I'm Robert.
And today we're talking about the state of tabletop. All right, well, we like to end the show with the beginning of the show, which is answers from you guys, everyone listening and watching. So last time we were talking about our history on the podcast and kind of going over our first 11 years. And the question we ended with was asking what your first experience with us was, how you found us, how you interacted with us and stuff. And so we're going to read some answers from those. It's cool. It's really humbling to read some of these, but we'll kick it off with Steven over here.
All right. First of all, thanks for listening to that podcast, everybody who did. That was fun, if not a little difficult to do, to try to remember everything. And
it was like 90 minutes, and it was like, there's a lot that happened, obviously. And
what's it, our longest?
Yeah, by far.
Excellent. I'm sure it won't be for long.
But
we've got that Last Jedi Part 2 podcast that we owe.
Yeah, that might have to be like an audio-only hidden episode somewhere, because that's going to be intense.
Bury it deep.
But anyways, also leaving so much out and so many people that are in the story and so many people that were involved and just a lot going on. So, but it was interesting to do.
Now, I will say this before I read this question, is the State of Tabletop podcast, this is kind of just in case you want to decide whether you want to stick around or not. Really just looking at, we're super interested in looking at and sharing a lot of the kind of greater industry reality. What games are the big players, what companies are the big players, kind of where did they come from in a lot of ways, and how it's all looking, how Kickstarter has certainly changed the landscape, how all these small publishers are doing. Even Gen Con a little bit, I've got some info about Gen Con as well. So just kind of like, this, it's helpful for us to do it as a business, like we're kind of constantly looking at all of these things, and think that everybody listening who is engaged with gaming in any kind of way could benefit from sharing in that discussion and dialogue about, well, what is it exactly that we're dealing with? Let's crack it open and actually look at it.
Yeah.
But let's start off first with Craig McCarthy responding to the history of first experience with the Covenant. It was worth the wait for that wonderful episode. Well, thank you, Craig. That's very nice.
We took like a month off.
Yeah, we did, yeah. My first memory of Team Covenant was when Netrunner came out. I watched one of your games on YouTube. When the graphics came up with the cards, I was so blown away I had to tell my wife about it. And I know that that's notable. You'd have to really do something exciting for me to tell my wife about it immediately, where it's like, hey, honey, you won't believe what just happened.
Yeah.
Cards on the screen, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, if his wife is anything like your wife, then I would assume the tabletop interest is lower.
It's mild.
Yeah, it's like
mild.
It's not like, oh, they posted another Star Wars Destiny video. Yeah, it's like.
But to move somebody that to make so much excitement for Craig, that is awesome to hear. And of course, Jonathan's probably the early originator of those graphics that now has passed on and is now being improved by Ben. So them hearing that, especially, I will speak for the video team. It's always amazing to hear that your work is being appreciated like that. I had never seen such quality content for something I cared so much about. Your passion had fueled my passion for games over the years. I only wish I could be supporting your content better. Shipping to Canada has been hard to justify. Understandable. Have you considered Patreon for your video content? I'd say more than anything, we consider a Canada store.
That's right.
It's just a hard choice.
Send me up north.
Are you going, Quebec or Vancouver?
I heard a lot of good things, weirdly enough, about Toronto.
I have heard good about Toronto.
They got a needle, I hear.
Is that where Spaz and Wappy reside?
No.
Area?
Maybe. I always pegged that for Quebec, but maybe not.
Well, if they're listening, they know we weren't listening, so.
I'm sorry, I don't remember. But no, consider Patreon for video. That I don't know, that's not really that's great. I mean, it's awesome to be like, hey, I'd like to give you money to see these videos. But we don't really do it for that reason. It's just a part of the greater kind of thing that we're up to as a business. So it fits into the activities currently just fine. So we don't need any additional help for that. But subscriptions and tokens and all of that certainly helps keep us on the air.
That's right.
I gotta say it.
Yeah,
I'll just say it.
That's correct.
He works in marketing.
Without our customers, we wouldn't be here. So There you have it. What about you, Robert?
Let's see. So this is from Vincent J. Rubio. He wrote, I jumped into your stuff when Netrunner launched in 2012, but I didn't buy into the subscriptions until I got into Lord of the Rings in late 2013. When I got married and was trying to get my new wife into co-op games, now I know she doesn't like them.
Now here's the thing, Vince, you gotta ask this about that situation is, what I've yet to really meet a person who doesn't like cooperative games as a category, right? I understand not liking some, maybe that's
Lord
the
of the
point.
Rings.
Maybe I don't like Lord of the Rings.
Are you pointing to the people who are playing the game?
Well, I'm just saying,
But I would also say is that was like in the earliest days when Lord of the Rings was comparatively to where it is now, having been refined over many years, a clunker.
Yeah, it's a bit clunky.
Yeah.
Big math equation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were familiar with games, it was a pretty normal thing.
But it was, anyways, just a little bizarre. But anywho, first impressions, I loved and still love how personal you make your business. It made me feel jealous that I didn't have friends like you guys in my area, but also comforted. I'm sorry, I can't read the small
Comforted.
font.
Yeah.
Comforted, yes. That there were still some people in the world who cared about the stuff I cared about. My wife and I are currently thinking about relocating from SoCal, and it's silly to admit, but I've had Tulsa jump into my head as a place to move to simply to be near a shop that cares. That's
really-
very,
That'd be awesome.
it's very flattering.
That is very flattering, and we'd love to have you.
Tulsa's great for a lot of other reasons too.
Tulsa's actually a very fine town to live in.
You've been a lot of
great
places,
food.
too.
I've lived a lot of places, and I happen to meet some people who don't like Tulsa, but every time I do, I'm just kind of like, why? There's so much going for Tulsa. It's cheap to live here. There's
easy going.
There's a good chunk of town to suit pretty much any personal climb or interest that you have. But yeah, I
We get all
could
four
say-
seasons.
4 seasons. Yeah, there's activities. There's a marathon every weekend.
Oh man, it blocks the roads. I remember when I lived in Midtown, that was one of the most frustrating
Yeah, it's
things.
just like, nobody told me.
There's a river with no water in it. There's
it's great.
What else? I mean,
No, there's about to be water. They're going to build a dam.
I've heard that.
Put all the water
that's
back
been
in.
they've put that up for vote so many times.
It passed though.
Did it pass?
Like some time ago. Actually.
I gotta start paying
The
attention
big one
again.
didn't, and then I think they snuck one in.
Little baby one did.
Yeah.
All right. And my answer comes from Alan Jones, often cited here on the cast. He says, "My first meeting with Team Covenant was in person at Gen Con. I was competing in the North American Intercontinental Championship for Conquest, and I had 2 rounds left, but I had lost 2 matches, so I had to win those last 2 rounds to qualify for the cut. I happened to cross your team sitting and trying to catch their breath on the side of the hallway. I said,
We do that often.
Yes.
I remember those hallways.
Well, that's back to in
The Blitz phase.
when we were at Gen Con and we were just like, we're going to make 100 videos this
Yeah.
weekend, which we didn't do this year, which was great. But anyways, and he says, I said hello and that I recognize you from your videos, but I could tell you were exhausted, as is fair. However, you saw that I looked a bit sad and asked my reason for seeming upset. I explained the situation and you encouraged me not to give up and to try my best and have fun. I won the next 2 matches and actually made the cut at what would be the last Conquest tournament at Gen Con. You guys are awesome, thank you.
That was
and
the
the second
This Is From Him tournament.
that was the This Is From Him. You guys are awesome, and the second I saw you were doing this podcast, I tried to make sure that I was there to give you the support that you gave me. Please never lose yourselves, as you guys are an inspiration to so many, and thank you for doing what you do."
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. You're one of the, you comment a lot on the podcast and the episodes and stuff, and so we really appreciate that. And I'm glad that the tournament went well for you, and I'm glad that you had fun and didn't. A lot of times in that situation, people might drop or get frustrated, and it's like it's not really about did you qualify or not, but like you met more people, you had a good time, and you didn't let those couple of losses kind of get you off the track. So,
and you ultimately hit your goal.
That's
which
right.
I assume is making the cut, which is awesome.
Achievement unlocked.
It really feels good to do
Yeah.
that, especially after those losses, and just be like, ah.
yeah, to be
I've
on that
got it.
edge
Yeah.
in that winner-in scenario. I mean, it's what it feels like once you make the cut, where it's like if you lose, you're out.
Yeah.
Every game is just kind of like intense. So, how about the two of you? Anything interesting happening this week too before we dive in?
How many Klavex War Leaders can you play on your turn?
Just
versus
ask Brad.
mine?
Well, if I play more, I win. You know what I mean?
Let's see. Do you remember this weekend? Did we hang out at all this
We
weekend?
did not hang out this weekend, but we did hang out last night, which was
Yes, we
the
did.
State
We
of
watched
the
the State of the
Union,
Union.
which was a great occasion to meet up and have some Sazeracs.
And a lot of people think that, well, I don't know this at all, so I'm just kind of saying that wildly, but we were beginning to say, like, it's really funny that State of Tabletop falls on the State of the Union week because it was totally this was supposed to be like last week, but we delayed because of the illness that was sweeping through.
Yeah.
So this was unintentional, but I think we might just do it every year. We could do a little update and just go right along with the government there.
If you like that, I just like the video. We'll see what happens.
Perfect test.
Vote for it.
Mentioning Sazeracs, though, I do owe somebody from a moon or two ago an update on the eggnog.
Oh,
it turned out very well. It was delicious.
Yes.
Everybody got a jar for Christmas.
Everybody got a pint, yeah.
I downed it. Well, I didn't down it. I used it for like the 2-week holiday
Poured
break.
it over pancakes.
Just slowly, no. I just, we'd have a little bit here and a little bit there, but it was great.
I got to tell you, Damon on Facebook, Damon Stone, the one and only of Netrunner fame and Perceptionist Reality fame, he apparently has a killer eggnog recipe that he was touting that sounded very much like kind of the old school kind of eggnog. But he said that he can age his for, anywhere from a day to like a week or two or even longer.
Doesn't sound like he has enough booze in it.
And I'm just thinking, in Tulsa, we age our eggnog, or at least Robert ages eggnog, like months. In the cellar.
cellar,
So bring it on, Damon. I think you guys should have a showdown.
Buried, unearthed.
An eggnog
I'll show
off?
you some perception.
It's all about infusing the booze, though.
Yeah, I remember when he handed it to me, he said, it'll keep for as long as you want it.
What I've heard is indefinitely. I'm sure eventually it will.
No one has ever been able to make that test because you just want to drink it.
You don't wait it that long.
The alcohol keeps any kind of, decomposition thing from going on, so you should be just fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's beautiful like that in a lot of
Well,
ways.
I wasn't Sazeracking last night, but we are in the middle of filming the Learning Destiny series.
Yes.
And I, of course, played Destiny this weekend and had a lot of fun. That game is in a great place. But more importantly, the trilogy format, which is what I had to build the decks for one of the advanced videos in the series, was just really good. Building with just a limited card pool and playing very fundamentals kind of Destiny. I'm really happy about it. So I'm excited to see that series come out and have all the Learning Destiny stuff kind of hitting the fan. What are you looking at?
I'm looking to see it because I remember I did something notable this weekend, but I can't remember it.
Man, that means we are getting
I'm too old.
Took a bath.
I am just too old. Yeah, I don't even have it. I've got nothing. All right. Wow, just a mystery, a black hole of life.
Well, Steven,
you must be doing something.
You were just in the moment, dude.
No, that's what I'm saying. This has been the problem my entire life. So add another little, book note to those that are keeping along with my personality from the cast. He's this kind of person. I've got a building a persona. That's the conundrum that I face at all times is I shouldn't be journaling, taking pictures, and essentially remembering anything so that I can stay completely in the moment. But then if you do that, you're not archiving anything, and the moment you kind of step out of that space and you're like, oh my gosh, I've forgotten everything. My life is a complete mystery.
For.
Yeah, that is what Facebook is actually for me in a lot of ways. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Should you archive? Should you not archive?
I mean, I had that last week when we were like, hey, what'd you do this week? I mean, I can always default to Destiny.
Yeah.
I played Destiny, assuredly.
But that said, it's it took me a minute of really thinking. I had to pull up my calendar just like you were doing to even remember what I had done on the weekend.
Yeah,
so,
well, sorry,
maybe that's achievement unlocked. So, all right, let's dive into the State of Tabletop, shall we?
Yes, please.
Please. Really, to start this out, I'm using data from some ICV2 articles about the 2016, 2015 sales data on the industry and whatnot. So I think this is important to kind of give the conversation a frame. So we can really understand the state of tabletop, which is the whole conversation. But running the chart down really quick. So this is for 2016. The data for 2017 hasn't really been collected or published anywhere that I could find. But 2016, in terms of, there's a couple different categories of sales for these tabletop games. There's the hobby channel, which is local retail stores, online retailers who are hobby-based, right, like us. And then there's also the mass market channel, which is Barnes & Noble and Target and...
It used to be, apparently, Toys R Us was a big mover and shaker with tabletop, but they went belly up.
So back when I was a kid, a lot of my Pokemon purchases came from there. They would have exclusive promos that if you bought the stuff at Toys R Us...
Amazon killed them more than anything.
Of course.
Sniped.
Yeah.
You don't have to go into a store that's
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so here's the thing. There's actually
Almost a short circuit there.
Yeah. Well, so I have a lot of nieces and nephews that I'm pretty close to. that I'm pretty close to. It wasn't even that, but like it's a store designed for kids.
Yeah.
But kids like to touch things, and like they like to pick things up, and when they're in a toy store, it's like they build the shelves so that kids can reach stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like this whole thing, and so then like as an adult, you take your nephew in there, and it's like, oh my goodness, like there's stuff everywhere and there's kids screaming and it's loud and it's not that clean and it's just like not ideal versus Amazon where it's like click, click, click,
the awkward
shows
thing
up.
about that problem is that that's the advantage that Toys R Us should have, is that kids can go in and scream and touch
Stimulation
stuff
overload,
and then you get to buy it.
Yeah.
But the model just seemingly not strong enough, or the market not strong enough. I don't know. The toys
The value wasn't strong enough. Yeah.
And also you imagine like young kids moving probably more towards screen-based entertainment and less towards, Transformers.
100%.
That kind of
It's
thing.
like, especially when you don't
shame
need,
for me.
when you don't need to go to the store to buy the game, you can just download it. It's a whole new paradigm.
Quote
So,
Jumanji, who plays board games anymore?
well, hey, I've heard that's funny. We'll see. Anyways, 2016. So I'm just breaking down the category. We have in the hobby channel specifically. So this is friendly local game store, online game store, not counting Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, that kind of thing.
And this is in U.S. and Canada only.
U.S. and Canada only for 2016. Total hobby game sales is $1.4 billion.
That's not anything to scoff at.
That's
actually.
more money than I can actually like process. It's beyond my actual comprehension.
Like if there were stacks of $20 bills, do we know how many stacks would be like in this room, for instance? If you filled this room with $20 bills, how much money would that be?
$350 million.
You think so?
Right?
This room?
No.
This room.
35 million.
But you don't want to do it with 20s.
Yeah, it's 35 million.
You don't want to do it with
Because it turns, no, that's wrong.
Do it with hundreds. You'll thank yourself.
I need a calculator.
But
Anyways.
money weighs a lot in them.
Yeah, so
kind of
1.4 billion. Now to break that down, and this is already revealing to me, which is collectible games. This includes Magic, Pokemon, Destiny, which was in December of that year.
The anime
Hero
based
Clicks,
ones, Card Fight,
and we'll get to those
Force
games
of Will.
specifically in a minute. 750 million of that, so about half, a little over half actually.
The entire thing
Of
is
all
collectible
of
games.
hobby game sales is collectible games, which is significant. But to run it down really quick, non-collectible miniatures games, so this is your X-Wing, your 40K, 205 million. Hobby board games, 305 million. Hobby card and dice games, so this is like LCGs.
It's a weird category.
LCGs, it's basically non-collectible, non-miniature games that aren't board games. So Love Letter, things that for whatever reason don't fit into that category. 130 million. Role-playing games, 45 million.
Get it together, RPGs.
And that's the breakdown.
Just kidding.
So
I would be willing to say that I'll bet I don't know this. So
Speculate then.
I'm speculating that at least in the world, there are more people role-playing than playing a collectible game easily.
Yeah, maybe. And
Easily.
perhaps it's less dependent on protracted or real-time investment, because you get your 3rd edition playbook set for D&D. Do you really need 4th edition other than you really wanted or something like that? You can play 3rd edition indefinitely.
That's the thing. Like the amount of players that category has, the sales are tremendously low.
Yeah.
That's the point that I want to make, because once you start role playing, I think it's kind of a lifetime thing, in and out. I think once you stop playing Magic, you can stop forever, or stop playing your collectible game. But I think role playing is kind of a long.
And the math on it, right? Even when we're talking about like an LCG versus a collectible game like Destiny, and I think Destiny is a much smaller game to buy than a Magic, as an example. Yeah. But living card game, the average customer, if you're buying 1 pack a month for a whole year, you're looking at 12 times 15, which is some amount of. Don't do this. No, it's 180. 180. It's 180. No, it's 180.
Okay.
Anyways, so versus Destiny, right? Even if you just buy 2 boxes a set at MSRP, you're spending $200 roughly. So like that's $600 a year versus 800 or versus 180, not 800. So on that math alone, it's like one Destiny player in retail sales probably ends up being triple one Netrunner player kind of situation. So same with role playing, where it's like you buy your cool rule book, that might be 6 people playing, and they're not buying new stuff necessarily. So just as a model, it is inherently going to make less money per player involved. But just for comparison's sake, 2015, same data, same sales, total hobby sales were 1.1 billion. So we had 300 million growth from 2015 to 2016 in the hobby channel alone.
So if we look at that too, I'm looking at these numbers, and it looks like, so we had about 125 there on collectible games, 125 million is the growth there. It looks like non-collectible miniatures didn't grow that much, 25 million.
30.
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, 30's fine. Hobby board games, 50 million-ish,
Yeah.
is that right? And then hobby card and dice, 25 million.
Got it.
So still even there, like the collectible games, I haven't run the percentages, but seem to be growing, accounting for the growth, maybe primarily.
Well, so just quick percentages. It looks like collectible games were about 8%. Non-collectible miniatures games were 12%.
Okay, so they were.
Hobby board games actually, 50 is 20% as well. 50 out of 250.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So it's about 20%. Hobby card and dice games is like a 25% growth. So that's actually pretty big.
That's actually cool.
Role-playing games get into 30% growth, roughly.
So I was totally wrong.
If your quick math was definitely wrong.
Completely wrong. I got distracted by the big numbers.
But I mean, percentage-wise, right? Role-playing games grows 10 million.
But I think that's telling. Like, that's hard for any industry to do. But
Yeah.
for role-playing
those
to
are-
grow that much is cool.
Those are sizable for sure.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Especially, after so long of being a all but established industry, how niche was it in even just 10 years ago kind of a thing?
To be playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Be doing anything.
Was that about the time the Star Wars stuff started coming out from FFG? The Star Wars role-playing?
So that would have started hitting 2014.
Okay.
So you have that. The whole industry is obviously growing across the board, but role-playing in particular, and when was the new edition of D&D came out? The latest one. That was a big
2015, 16?
There was I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
It's been out for a while. That probably would drive that.
So,
for
but
sure.
I think that gives you a pretty good, the reality check of over half of the sales are coming from collectible games, and even board games that are something that are talked about a lot as like they're in the golden era, they're this big thing. Making up, ultimately, even if you throw in the hobby card and dice games with board games, 25-30%.
Yeah.
Now riddle me this though. I mean, how much more likely is a collectible game to exist in the hobby outlet, the hobby like store outlet, versus a board game that might have a lot more mass market presence? So if we combined hobby and mass market, do board games ultimately win out, like across the entire sphere?
That's hard to say
What do you
because
think?
the combined data is interesting. I know that collectible games are particularly big in the mass market as well. Like you look at Pokemon, I think any Target or Walmart you've ever been into has a massive display, and they rotate those things out all the time.
Pick them up on checkout.
Even Amazon in that way, where it's like, a game played by kids makes sense. Mom or dad is in Walmart with the kid or without the kid buying the product there instead of going into a local store to buy a product.
Yeah.
Right? And it makes a lot of sense.
That's true, yeah. All right, well, let's look at the collectible games. Can we dive into that?
So these are basically just rankings as of early last year. Dropped my pen there. Early last year, 2017, and we're kind of going to go by category and just get a makeup of the top games and what companies they're made by. So the top 10 hobby collectible games, and I'm going to just start with the top 5 here. Number 1, Magic the Gathering, made by Wizards of the Coast.
No surprises here, right?
No shock.
We've been saying this. Everybody's been saying this for
So it's the
years.
biggest game in the biggest category, right? Pokemon TCG is number 2, made by Pokemon USA. Yu-Gi-Oh! By Konami is number 3. Star Wars Destiny by Asmodee/Fantasy Flight Games, number 4. And then Marvel and DC HeroClix by WizKids coming in at number 5. With actually, most notably from number 6 to 10 is that number 8, 9, and 10, which is D&D Fantasy Miniatures, Dice Masters, and Pathfinder Battles, all made by WizKids.
All WizKids. So really on the collectible front, WizKids doing pretty well. And they started by pioneering the collectible miniature format with Mage Knight. You remember that?
Yeah, we were playing that back
First
in
of its
the
kind.
old band
We were playing
days.
that all the time. And remember Force of Will and Cardfight Vanguard, and those are like the anime style games. Really, Force of Will, Cardfight Vanguard, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon really could all kind of go into that anime-inspired category. So it's kind of interesting that is such a huge part of the collectible card game market. And I wonder how much of that spirals out of, obviously, Pokemon. but Yu-Gi-Oh, a show about card games, right? Like you can't deny the
full
cultural
meta.
impact.
That works out, yeah. And I mean, I
Yeah.
think, obviously this is all U.S. data, U.S. Canada, so North American really. And I know that Vanguard or Cardfight Vanguard is very popular in Asia in particular. Huge audience there. A lot of people playing that game.
Ben says Force of Will is up and coming too. That's like the up and comer. Apparently,
shakes
that's
his
what
hands.
he says.
What's really interesting to me about this is that we have on this list Magic, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh, right? The three games that have been around forever.
The kind of the Holy Trinity.
And, I'd be curious to know, what do you guys think is why are they still at the top of the list, right? Like,
I have a lot of theories about this.
they have staying power. They've been here forever. These are all very community-based / lifestyle, the kind of games that you expand and build upon. But yeah, I mean, what do you think are the main reasons that they are still sitting at the top of this list?
Okay, so let's just throw out the kind of historical precedent if we want to, because obviously they started out, they've been around forever. So they kind of got their roots in early whenever collectible games were starting to become a thing. And really probably became a thing because of at least Magic and Pokemon. I know that they were around in those early days. But I think really when it comes to something like Magic especially, these were games that decided, there's a lot of good games out there, right? And during the collectible era, there was a whole lot of fine and good collectible games, designed by Garfield or otherwise. But what happened was the ability to invest in the playing of the game and the getting people together to play the game, in addition to just the game itself, right? So like you actually started these organized play programs. You started eventually the Friday Night Magic. You had this kind of, come together and play and make that a game all its own. And I think that was really the key for any of these games to be successful over a long period of time, is figuring out how to incentivize players to get together and play it in an organized way. That seemed to me to be the breakthrough of the collectible model that they were able to crack.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
For me, part of it is that these are essentially the blue chip games. They are all but reserve currencies, borrow a whole bunch of economic terms here, but that if you invest in any of those top three, they have been, to kind of borrow what you were touching on, they've been so well established and have such a protracted history that if you get your cards and you have your good time with them, and assuming you take reasonably good care of them, at a certain point you can literally just cash out and probably make more money than you ever put in, kind of a thing. And that is not only a huge buffer for the proportionally much higher cost of getting into a collectible game, but it's just something that is of added incentive. Of course, plenty of people turn the singles market and all that kind of stuff into its own kind of industry and business in its own right. But for an individual player, that is any and everything, I think, to say that, yeah, I can rationalize this kind of big investment, because what other hobbies are you doing that might cost this much on an annual basis? I don't want one. But this is a great way to get into something that is both super entertaining and have a great time and be a part of a community, but then also really, no matter when you want to check out of it, have
a way to check out.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we've seen even with the LCGs where, if I buy product and open it, inherently it's going to sell for less, because you could buy the exact same product
100%.
It's like
unopened,
a car, in a way.
without any mileage on it, so to speak. Or,
Right off
what
the
if you
lot.
just happen to be missing cards from a pack or something?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think, so there's a lot of elements being talked about here, right? Which is, it's easy to get out, so the risk is low.
Yep.
It's kind of, the collectible nature makes it so that it's worth something, and so that you can get out. And even you were saying that them constructing organized play and encouraging people to play. And I think there's a lot of elements beyond that where you have, part of the reality is these are games that have players.
Yep.
So they have this body of mass that makes it so appealing, because it's like, if you want to buy, whether it's, what was the name of that game? The Force of Will. It's like, you're kind of taking a little bit of a risk because they don't have as much time that they've been around. You don't know if you can get out of the game. But also, it's like, are there even going to be people to play against?
Yeah.
Versus with like Pokemon, I know there's going to be people to play against.
And not only is Magic an institution, but there's an institution nested in it, which is Friday Night Magic. Everybody knows about Friday Night Magic, more or less. But it's just like...
If not, now you do.
It's a thing that people come to expect the world, of, certainly the country all over. It's like, hey, do you guys do FNM? It's like, what? No, we know exactly what that is.
We talk about the flywheel a lot too, with like Amazon, old Bezos' model, where it's like we'll go 15 years not really making any money, or really, quite frankly, losing a lot of money, to get all of these systems built up in a sustainable way, where once all of this kind of structure is built, we will be unstoppable. Yeah. That's exactly what something like Magic has done. Right, you have all of these early years where it builds the structure, learns the lessons, and learns from the players, and establishes what a collectible game kind of needs to do as they learn and grow. And then by the time we get to 2015, 2016, everything is so in place that for you to step in and play Magic, to step in and sell Magic, to step in and host a tournament is all laid out. You're ready to go. Like you just click a button or read an article and you're done.
And they've also, I was looking on the Wizards site, and there's like a new to Magic section, right? And it's got, it's literally like, here's the basics, here's how to play. And even they do some really cool stuff, which is like, they're trying to make it as easy as possible to get in. Sure. They have decks that you can buy off the shelf. They have these decks that retailers get to give to new players. It's like, that's literally, we will send you decks as cheap as possible so that you can just hand this to a new person. And I think there's also an element, and this is what makes the collectible games, we have a lot of experience with LCGs over the past 5 or 6 years. But Destiny really making me realize, going back, it's like the draft format and sealed formats for Magic and the Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon make it so low barrier to play these games in a fun, like, exciting way.
Perpetually fresh format itself,
It's really just, I think that is a big secret to getting new people in. And we talked about, our LCG is sustainable at some point, and we were talking about the point where a game is adding players slower than it's losing them.
Right.
And there's the research on like every year Magic loses 25% of its players.
Yeah.
And it cycles people through, and people come back, people leave.
Is it really that?
That's what the stat. Yeah, it was about 25%. So obviously, at that point you've got to be adding a lot of
26%
at least, if not more. And they've done that for a long time, and that's what you have these games that we see even the collectible category from 2015 to 2016 growing 125 million.
Isn't that nuts?
So
terrifying.
It gained a sixth year over year, which is pretty strong. And I don't know how much of that was Magic or whatnot, but I think there's a lot of reasons that go in. They have a lot of advantages being first. And so to see something like, Destiny, on this data, here's what's crazy about Destiny. Destiny was out for 1 month. On this chart.
That's nuts.
So that was December.
That's perfect.
So I'm really curious to see this chart after a whole year of Destiny. But you have someone like Fantasy Flight, who we'll see on this list in Asmodee coming up, who potentially has the experience and resources to play ball, and we will see if they can or not.
Well, imagine that. Like, look at how this all kind of evolved. There's some things that I didn't recognize, and I was looking up the official, kind of just from Wikipedia, the Wizards start. So Wizards starts in 1990, and Garfield is talking to them about this game.
Peter Atkinson.
Robo-Rally, Peter Atkinson. Robo-Rally, and then has this idea, it's called Mana Clash originally, of Magic the Gathering, right? And actually set up a separate little company, Garfield Games, because they were in like legal battles with other people, Palladium, I think, and some other publishers. And then in like 93, is that when Magic officially first launches?
Yep.
So you have Wizards of the Coast, and then Magic launches for Wizards. And all this time, there's TSR, who originally published Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax and all of that, coming up from like, the late 70s, I think. TSR was like 1973.
Back with like when 40K was coming around too in the 70s and 80s.
So 1973 is TSR with D&D, and then over across the pond there in England, you have like 1975, I think, is Games Workshop, and they're doing a totally different miniatures thing. But you have the role, so you already have the three things at that point. You have role-playing, and then Wizards is starting on the card games and the collectible stuff, and then you have the miniatures over there. And basically what happens is TSR is doing D&D, Wizards hits Magic, hits it big, buys TSR, and then not only that, but then they get the rights to Gen Con, which is crazy, right? Because TSR was, the Lake Geneva was where that comes from. So they were running Gen Con. And then that happens, and then Wizards gets bought by Hasbro. And then Hasbro sells the rights to Gen Con back to Peter Atkinson, which is insane how all of that works. But they also have a patent on collectible card games. which I did not realize.
Yeah,
What?
That's why the Star Wars CCG in the 90s was customizable card game.
That's right.
That's why the Spoils tournament was tournament card game, not even trading card game.
Yeah.
That's why there was trading card game in the first place.
Uh-huh.
And so they have to
realize
all
there was
do
that
some
thing.
very like specific.
That's so funny.
You know, there was the Upper Deck with the LCG when they put and it was like
Oops.
immediately
Oops.
had to take that down because the names get. I mean, it's
Redacted.
really hard to patent that kind of thing at this point. But
So the other piece of this that I didn't fully appreciate, first of all, Wizards buys TSR, which gives them Dungeons & Dragons, April 10th, 1997, $25 million. Right? So like, compared to like, so a 2016 sales for all of role-playing is $45 million.
Yeah.
So that's actually, pretty
Paid a lot of money.
large acquisition in
Yeah.
97. And then they get the patent in 99, or on 97, they get the patent on collectible card games. What I didn't fully appreciate is in 99, they started publishing Pokemon.
yep, that was originally Wizards.
So they had Magic and Pokemon,
Yeah, that's insane.
which puts you so far ahead of any potential competitor for the next, as we're seeing, 25, 30 years. It's just insane. And they hit lightning with this thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because look at this entire category, this collectible games category started there.
ginormous.
Yeah.
Right? Really, I mean, really.
Yeah,
And
well,
that's nuts.
and the collectible, I was writing a blog for a while that may or may never get published. That was really having me go back and look at the start of a lot of this stuff, and like one of the things that struck me is how big of a deal Magic was for the industry because you had hobby shops and toy shops and collectible shops, a lot of baseball cards and
Yeah.
Marvel, like there was like hero cards. Remember those packs?
My gosh.
But for the first time, there was a tabletop game that had the economics of your collectible cards mixed with people looking for a place to play, people wanting to gather to play this thing and trade. And like that was a really, I mean, there weren't, in 93, right, there weren't game stores.
Yeah.
Like that was not,
It was the kind of catch-all hobby.
yeah, it was a hobby
place.
store,
Yeah.
a comic book store.
Because you
with
could
a-
get your model rockets and all
And
this kind of stuff at
and
the
that-
same place.
That was ultimately
Comic
pretty
books.
cool in a lot of ways because at that point there was so much discovery that could happen in those stores. You would walk in one day and it's like, here's this new thing called 40K.
Your mini railroad stuff.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Like,
It's
what
been a
is
while
this?
since someone's, yeah.
Check this out; it will blow your mind.
I'm waiting for it.
Pokemon trading card game when it comes out sells 400,000 copies in less than 6 weeks. Just to put some scope on that.
This is Pokemon again?
Yeah, Pokemon sold 10 times better than their initial projections.
Jeez.
And they had Magic at the time, so they were
Yeah.
projecting it, I assume, somewhat reasonably. 10 times better. Such high demand that sports card series were discontinued in 99 so they could print more Pokemon cards instead.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Isn't that
So
amazing?
that's when I got into tabletop gaming. Really, I mean, I played board games and stuff, but I had gotten the Christmas before Pokemon the game and a Game Boy, and then the card game came out, and someone got me some starters, and it's really cool because you had Magic that was heavily like teenager / college age people playing this game, middle school, high school, college.
And it's a non-recognizable franchise, which I think is important. Pokemon is familiar for a lot of other reasons, like
They had
Yu-Gi-Oh!
the
Is familiar
Game
for a
Boy
lot of other
coming in.
reasons, but what's Magic? It's just the card game.
Yeah, and so but Pokemon being the first game that appealed to kids.
Younger.
Like
Yeah.
I was 9, my little brother Tim was 6, and we were playing Pokemon, collecting these things, right? So that just kind of shaped. I mean, as you can see, collectible games being the big person in
And
the
that's
room.
why they're still here. All of this, like literally all the way from 97 on, that's why we're looking at the chart we're looking at.
Yep.
They just had the massive head start. And then Hasbro buys Wizards for, what, $325 million?
It's a steal.
That is crazy, right?
But at the time, right, it wasn't. Like they
They're making a bet.
it was a bet. Same thing with the D&D acquisition, right? It's like when you realize that RPGs in total right now are $45 million a year, and you pay $25 million for one of the IPs, not even all of the IPs, right? So,
Interesting.
kind of moving along to some of the other categories so we can kind of have a whole frame of reference.
I didn't
here.
realize WizKids was so serious.
that they
Oh, yeah.
were they're a real company.
I didn't realize the clicks thing was such a big deal. It's a big deal.
It's a pretty big deal.
Really big
Well, and we'll see them popping up on a few of these other lists here. So non-collectible miniatures games. This is the 40K style X-Wing. Surprising a little bit. I remember people making a big deal of it last year when this data first came out, which is how I found this data in the first place. But X-Wing, #1 on the list, Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games, actually displacing Warhammer 40K that was sat at the top of this list for 40 years,
That's
30
unbelievable.
years.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
ultimately, that's wild.
Yeah, especially given with 40K, the number of SKUs that they have, the history of the
you
players.
buy 2 models and put some number 1.
Well, and this speaks to what we were talking about. Magic having such a head start, Pokemon, some of these early games having such a start. Games Workshop had a 30, 40-year head start, and yet X-Wing is capable of jumping them that quickly.
And I have some theories here that are worth kind of going into.
I like theories.
It's very simple, and it's kind of what we've been talking about even last week about what we're doing and what we're trying to do with us. But the difference here to me is that, and Games Workshop has recently overgone a pretty big turn.
We need to do a whole podcast on it. I'm fascinated
Just
by
overhauled.
it. Executive culture all the way
And
top
that
down.
happened after this data. Not necessarily because of this data, but it was happening while this data was being produced, right? Which is the fact that even with 40 years head start, getting into 40K was still tremendously hard. Like,
Have you seen those rules manuals?
Yeah, well, have you ever painted a mini before?
putting them in, I mean,
Well,
it was very
it's 2
hard.
hobbies in one.
Yeah.
So very difficult, and then you have X-Wing come along, and they change the game, right? Because that's where, to me, you don't have the hobby element X-Wing. These are pre-painted miniatures.
Yeah.
And not only that, not only do they make a game that is super easy to get into, super easy to learn, I can teach that game in like 3 minutes, ultimately, on how to play. And so that's a great sign. But then also, it's Star Wars.
Yeah.
So all these elements coming together.
Reason to do it, I guess.
I'm not surprised, and that's when I look at like the collectible list, if we're like hypothetically thinking like, how could someone come in and get to the top of this list that's not been here for 30 years? But the trick is, Wizards focused in, they only offer 2 or 3 games, Magic being one of them.
Hard.
And they make it easy.
Yeah.
Right? They are consciously making it easy for you to be a retailer, for you to be a player, for you to get involved. And so, I think 40K has made a lot of strides in that direction. I thought it was really, and we should do a podcast about it, but it was really cool that they have the basically, I forget a scaffolding style in their games, right? They have a game that is smaller, using the same models that you put together in Paint. It's a lot less energy. And then they have another game that's a little bigger, and you add stuff. By the time you're playing full 40K, you have your full army without having to do the full army to even play your first game.
Let me give you a very brief bullet point to give a little more reference to Games Workshop, because I found this fascinating. They started in 1975. That is a long
Old school.
time ago.
Making
comparatively.
peripherals, right?
They made wooden boards for Mancala, Backgammon, Go, etc. They made high quality wooden boards. Then they became the U.S. importer of Dungeons & Dragons to England, to the Great Britain area, I presume.
The Isles.
Opened the first retail store for their products in 1978 and other people's products.
So 78, they're a game company.
And they have a store.
Well, actually, at that point, they're making peripherals.
They're making peripherals, that's
and
right.
importing D&D.
Yes.
And they open a store.
And I don't know if they had 40K at that point on the top. It's actually probably further down here whenever that all launches. But then in 1979, they founded their Citadel paint line. 1979, Citadel paints.
Wow.
We're still using them.
Yeah.
Agrax, Earthshade, whatever all that stuff is. I
Whatever all
can
that
talk the
stuff.
talk.
Yeah.
I may not be able to paint worth anything, but I can talk it.
Goes on the brush.
So this is, we're not even out of the 70s yet, and so many things that we're still, grappling with in the industry are here.
Yeah.
And I think Games Workshop, in a lot of ways, probably framed up what the future of the modern retail store was going to look like, where you had your paints and you had your figures, and it was probably more focused on the hobby fantasy side of things, rather than the train side of things.
If they're importing Dungeons and Dragons, that makes a lot of sense too, because a lot of people like to use models and paint for D&D, right? So that's why maybe even a paint line makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So Games Workshop, even after that big old head start, just gets hammered by X-Wing. And we don't know how much so. We don't know by how.
Well, there's no
To what
kind of a
degree,
margin?
et cetera.
no degrees, but
WizKids again.
WizKids number 3 with
Doing it.
D&D,
Make it work.
Marvelous Minis. So bringing in a miniatures game, and I don't know if this is what this is, but they had their Dungeons and Dragons style pre-assembled, not painted miniatures that they released that people were very excited about, obviously.
Yeah, that's great.
Then number 4, we have Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games coming in again with
is
Star Wars
crazy.
Armada, which actually
amazing.
blows my mind because number 5 is War Machine by Privateer Press.
I would have pegged War Machine for a
At least
higher
number 3.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I were just knowing that X-Wing was number 1 from this last time, without looking at the data, I would have said X-Wing, 40K, War Machine, and then
anything else.
whatever
And the
else.
rest.
So to see Armada on the list is surprising, and to see a War Machine below that is also surprising.
That's
they've
probably
been around
really
for a while.
surprising at Privateer Press.
That's pretty crazy, honestly. Like,
Whoops.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's wild. And Armada, like Armada never struck me as like a bombshell success or anything.
Yeah.
But it's working. I mean, there's a lot of people playing and buying that game,
Yeah.
or at least in spring 2017.
Well, and that's
just very steady.
The funny thing is about Armada is in 2017, I think they released very few products, and that was something the Armada community was pretty frustrated about. So I assume on the data on the next time Armada is going to slide away, but we'll see
I
how it
guess,
goes.
yeah.
But yeah, I think most
Surprised to
notably
see it
about
there.
this ranking to me is just that X-Wing did come in and top the list. That's a big game.
Out of nowhere, man.
And so now moving on to the next chart. So Hobby Channel card and dice games. And these are basically board games that aren't board games, right? So this is living card games. This is things like, for some reason, Codenames is in this list.
That's
Strange.
awkward.
Strange.
Yeah, so the parameters on this,
A little amorphous.
slightly amorphous. It could also
Yeah.
be like, all these games that I'm seeing that I would consider board games
Yeah.
are
Then you have
either
Legendary too.
have a lot of expansions. Legendary is a
Munchkin?
non-LCG LCG. And Splendor is weird too. That's what gets weird for me on this. So anyways,
going on here?
just to kind of run it down really quick. Number 1 is Arkham Horror by Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games. Notably, Steven's making a funny
Is
face.
this literally anything without a board?
Maybe.
You know, because like Codenames, you set
That
the
would
cards
ex-
out.
that might be
Splendors,
the
cards.
continuity, yeah.
Boss
Man,
monsters,
swoosh, you
cards.
just nailed it.
Yeah, yeah,
Munchkin.
yeah.
So Arkham Horror, the LCG, Asmodee, and that's notable to me because
That's number 1.
number 1, and not only number 1 compared to Codenames, who's number 2 by Czech Games Edition, but none of the other LCGs are on this list.
That's so crazy.
And this is before L5R came out,
Yeah.
granted. But Netrunner's not here. Thrones isn't here. Conquest, that was out at the time, isn't here.
Arkham blew up.
Arkham is a big game.
Destroyed it. And Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings isn't even there, even after, and I feel like it had a pretty
Years.
good player base that was going and sticking with the game. But man, Arkham
So
Horror said
that
hello.
strikes me. And so then going down the list a little bit, Codenames, which is super popular, Czech Games Edition, Smash Up by Alderac Entertainment, AG, Sushi Go from Game Right, Marvel Legendary from Upper Deck.
That was the Oops LCG, right?
That was the Oops LCG, yeah. Rick and Morty, because that used to be a collectible game.
yeah.
And then
Doomtown did that too when they were rebooting.
They did
called
the
it an
Oops,
LCG?
Yeah,
And
they
then
became
the
the
most
ECG.
recent reboot?
Yeah,
The reboot of the reboot?
Well, no, not the second reboot. The first reboot, rather.
Oh,
That's
okay,
what I'm
okay.
gonna say, yeah.
Rick and Morty from Cryptozoic, Patchwork from Mayfair, Munchkin from Steve Jackson, Boss Monster from Brotherwise, and Splendor from Asmodee.
So it's so surprising. I would have put
America.
Munchkin a little bit higher on
Yeah.
this. I always hear people talking about it. It's
very popular.
It.
I mean, the fact that it's still registering, because like all these are super popular games. I've heard of, so many people own all of these.
Oh, yeah. These
and
are all
so,
staples in
Not
one
surprising. I
way or
think the notable thing for me is just that Arkham Horror is dominating the list.
That's so amazing.
Magically. And this was, again, based off 2016. So it had come out in August.
Yeah.
Putting it out there. It had a half a year.
Yeah.
So I will be very curious to see this list again once it's been updated.
Cool.
Moving along to board games, some cool stuff going on here. One is Scythe.
Scythe beating Catan is insane to me.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
a big
that's
game. Now,
crazy.
Scythe was like a big box, right?
Yes,
Even
it's more
Catan, because
expensive.
Catan came out like 20 years ago, but
Yeah.
it's still number 2.
How do you
What's
lose?
crazy about that?
How do you lose?
In my mind, Catan feels like a relatively modern game. And then I remember it's early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it's 2018.
Yeah.
But you just blew my mind.
I honestly, I can't help but think that Catan could have been so much more successful.
Yeah.
Given the head start that they had and the product that they had, and it all could have come together in a way that they could be like untouchable in the way that Magic is. Have organized play, really just humming along.
Now-
have their retail programs.
I will say on that score, they do have their like world championships and qualifiers and whatnot. And the thing about board games that's interesting is when you recognize this is number 2 on the list, and also once people own the core game,
Yeah.
they own it.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have to get
This
people.
isn't counting all expansions. It's just
It
the
is
base
counting the
game?
expansions, but just the recognition that these sales are coming from either new people buying the game or expansions.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
And this is just hobby market.
And it's just hobby.
So like Catan and Barnes & Noble doesn't count, and Target
Yeah,
doesn't count.
And that's where they're getting a lot of their traction.
That's true.
It makes sense that Scythe would beat them on the hobby channel. They should be proud of that.
But it's still notable
Yeah.
to do that.
It's
and then
notable.
number 3, you have Clank from Renegade Game Studios. They're the ones that did Lotus, I think it was the name of that game.
yeah.
Is that what that was called? So
Yeah.
they're doing a lot of the like codename-sized games. They're smaller,
Affordable.
kind of shorter length games, which I really like a lot.
Yeah.
Jim Henson's Labyrinth
How does
from
that
River
get on?
Horse.
I've never even seen or heard of that.
tell
I
Jonathan.
love the series. Oh my gosh, it's the greatest show. on
It's
television.
from Labyrinth, right?
That's right.
Then you have Pandemic from Asmodee/Z-Man Games. That's a huge game.
Surprised
Mansions
that's
of
not
Madness, again, Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games. Terraforming Mars, Stronghold Games. Ticket to Ride, Asmodee/Days of Wonder. Carcassonne, Asmodee/Z-Man Games. And Betrayal House on the Hill. Wizards
love me
owns
some
Avalon
Carcassonne.
Hill, by the way,
Yes,
who
it
makes
does.
this. So they're registering here on the board game list, but that's 1, 2,
Half the
3,
list
4,
is A&A.
5 from Asmodee.
Wait, but how is Carcassonne doesn't have a board either?
You build a
going-
board.
Oh, that's true.
Because
Yeah,
it's
there's got to be like cardboard. There's got to be a thing
There's,
about it.
I should have really known that going into this,
But
but,
so
that's
let's-
neither here nor there. But
Just think about for a second. Let's just stop for a second and
All right,
think
pause.
about the reality of Asmodee's coming in and buying out the industry.
basically,
like
all the
Matt.
non-Wizards, Games Workshop, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon.
You can see why these investors want to swoop in with these growth rates, though.
Here's some interesting things. So Asmodee owns the French rights to WizKids and Pokemon lines.
The French rights?
The
Yeah.
French. They publish the French versions of those, from what I've learned. August 2014 and November 2014 mergers with Days of Wonder and Fantasy Flight Games. So Days of Wonder and FFG go into the thing. Then they
That was
acquire the
huge for
rights, the English language rights to Catan from Mayfair. They create a new company, Catan Studio. Then they do Spot It, which we've seen. They acquire the rights to
We
Spot
spotted it.
We love Spawning.
That means they also get Ticket to Ride, Dixit, Citadel, Small World, Seven Wonders, and of course Catan, which is insane. July 22nd, 2016, they get F2Z, which is Z-Man Games, Plaid Hat Games, and Philosophia. In January 2nd, 2017, they get the board game publisher Heidelberger, and then they announced that merger. And then they get Spanish editor Edge Entertainment here in January 3rd of 2017 as well. So they are on an absolute tear. They are on an absolute tear.
Gobble, gobble,
Acquisition
gobble.
After acquisition.
So what does that mean ultimately to the industry? What do we think about all of this? Because they seem to be the one that's really coming in and consolidating.
I mean, in certain respects, it is, obviously worrisome because you don't want, too much centralization and control over all the relatively disparate and unique kinds of titles that are floating around in the ecosystem. But at the same time, it has been very helpful for a number of titles that were essentially flailing around. They didn't necessarily have the expertise. I think perhaps the best example is anybody who is into Ashes under, Plaid Hat, their own independent game studio, had a very popular initial launch and then just flat lines.
Because they couldn't put product out.
Couldn't put product out.
Even
and
FFG.
Then A&A comes in, picks them up, and
Even
it's like,
FFG.
well, we'll help you with this whole kind of distribution stuff. But then again, these are complex systems, so it's like, we'll see how it pans
Yeah,
out.
there's some advantages obviously to consolidating because you can centralize all the business activity, the publishing, the
Sounds great on
distribution
paper,
stuff.
right?
Yeah.
I can pitch this to any small studio
Yeah,
and say, look at what I can
and
do
like
for
a
you.
studio, right? Even as we've seen with FFG, stripping all the business out and letting them be a design studio, right? It's all the artists and developers and designers, and not the marketing and accounting and finance and distribution and stuff. So the other thing is, they're still comparatively, as far as I'm aware, when you compare them to Wizards or Pokemon or Konami, smaller than those. So
Yeah.
even with all of this action happening, they're not the biggest kid in the room.
Right.
And not only that, but this kind of segues into the next point I wanted to make, which is Scythe on this list.
Yeah.
Number one in the hobby market.
Stonemeyer's doing work.
Also, though, they kickstarted this game for 1.8 million.
Now that's fascinating.
Isn't it?
So and what's fascinating about that is you go from kickstarting a game, which typically means it's not going to work in the hobby, right?
You'll sell.
It's
two
like,
copies,
I remember Relic Knights by, I think it was Cool Mini or Not. Cool Mini or Not on the list.
Yep.
And but Cool Mini or Not over the past 2 years has really done some work.
and they're almost exclusively Kickstarter.
they're
That's where they were doing
But
their stuff.
they do mostly Kickstarter. And so Relic Knights, though, Kickstart's huge Kickstarter, but they sell the first 2 years of the game.
Yeah.
And so none of the retail stores want to touch it because,
Right.
me as a retailer providing space and effort and support to get these communities together and host them, to not sell any products for 2
Yeah,
years
it's
is
not a
not
great deal.
exactly exciting. So,
I'll say
but
yes to that.
Scythe, to me, having this huge Kickstarter, going on to become the #1 game in the hobby channel is significant and cool. And kind of speaking to your, does Asmodee owning all these companies, is that bad? Is it good? What does it imply? But it's like you have someone like Stonemaier coming along and Kickstarter democratizing the system and saying it doesn't matter. Like we're going to Kickstarter and technology are changing the way this industry is working.
And there was something about Scythe as well. It was on everybody's lips for about 6 or 9 months.
Keep your eyes on Stonemaier games.
Yeah, it's like Scythe. Have you played it? Do you have a copy?
The way that they're conducting their business, and Stonemaier is the guy's name. I forget that actually started the studio and designs most of the stuff. Is hugely is kicking things up a notch. He's raising the bar. He's putting out incredible blogs. Style. He's talking about how to run Kickstarters, just all of this great information, and really putting a lot of quality into the content and the games that are being produced. So I think that is one of the greatest companies to be watching right now, without a doubt.
And
probably going to get an offer from A&A pretty soon, or Asmodee.
Or someone. Yeah. And for reference, our friend Luke Crane of Burning Wheel fame and Luke of the Wheel, now working at Kickstarter, he tweeted at the end of last year some stats on Kickstarter. So this is 2017. So it's a little more updated data, which is $172 million pledged through Kickstarter for games.
172 million.
That's all categories of board games. But for context, going back to the industry totals,
7,000 projects.
Board games here at 305 million, even if we assume a linear growth from the year before 2015, probably 2017 clocking in somewhere around 350 million.
So we're looking at 50. We're looking at half of that.
But
is Kickstarter.
Kickstarter is half as big as all retail channel sales for tabletop games, for board games in particular.
For board games, that's insanity.
Goodness.
So if you take all of the board games that are being sold in the entire U.S. Canada hobby channel market in the retail stores, and you take all the sales, cut that number in half, that's how much was pledged directly via consumers on Kickstarter.
And that's going from, obviously, Kickstarter's getting their cut, but you have the customer buying directly from the producer of the game. Mm-hmm. So you're, obviously skipping the distribution retail model.
So you might be making as much or more profit off of half the sales.
And just most notably, I think, is, you have the traditional model in the industry that's happening, the hobby market sales. Mm-hmm. But to me, Kickstarter and potentially ways like that, whether it's going directly to Kickstarter or not, but Kickstarter showing that there's some change happening. Yeah. And this is a very different, there is consolidation going on, but new games are coming out all the time, and people are finding new ways to get those games 100% on the table.
It's its own game, man. Let's wrap it up with these role-playing games.
Yeah, and finally we have role-playing games. No surprises. Number 1, Dungeons and Dragons by Wizards of the Coast. Number 2, Pathfinder by Paizo. Number 3 is Star Wars by Asmodee Fantasy Flight Games. Number 4 is Adventures in Middle-earth from Cubicle 7, and number 5 is Shadowrun by Catalyst Games.
Shadowrun's been around a long time.
Labs.
It's been doing it forever.
Yeah.
So that's basically the channel breakdown. Now, all that data is from spring 2017, it looks like, right?
So that's all annualized data for 2016, basically.
Okay.
But it was published in the spring of 2017.
Mm-hmm. So I think some notable things is that the hobby channel, the card dice games, and the non-collectible miniatures, FFG just swooping in, A&E swooping in, and taking the top spot in both those, Arkham Horror and X-Wing, respectively. They have 5 of the 10 on the board games because A&E just snapping things up. Yeah. And once you start snapping, it's hard to stay out of the top charts there. Mm-hmm. And then Dungeons & Dragons really unfazed in terms of role-playing.
Just doing its thing.
Good luck unseating that.
And I think that's interesting when you're thinking about, the Asmodee plan or strategy, and it's like they obviously are making a dent in the collectible list, but everything that's not collectible, they're serious in. Yeah. Whether it's half or the top spot.
It could be there with Destiny because it's fourth. It's fourth behind the 3, so it could rise up there easily.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We will see.
Will it though?
Yeah. So in general, I think that gives a pretty good frame of the industry and what's going on and who's making games and whatnot. Is there anything about these charts that over the next couple of years, even this next year, you think will change, or any trends that you think will continue?
I mean, you got to expect that collectible games will just continue their dominance just because of the overall investment that's required.
Just the economic exchange across the entire, how much that powers all of the, the ins and outs of the industry from distribution to retail stores. I mean, for instance, if you were to take collectible games out of the ecosystem, how much would survive?
Well,
Not the very few retail stores would do
far less than half, because most retail stores they're buttering their bread all but solely on these collectible games. If not,
Most of the revenue
the high
coming.
dollar non-collectible miniature games, $40K and that kind of a thing. So yeah.
But does collectible still work? Like, in terms of the way that the culture and the hobby is progressing, is that really going to be the future? Is that the next 30 years? Is the collectible model is still going to be the thing? Because I really wonder, especially with Kickstarter coming around and people really liking the idea of getting a guarantee of what they want and investing in new games that they like, and really seemingly more of a moving around to new games and exploring new games as opposed to sticking with one.
Yeah.
Seems to be trending a little bit more. So,
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to the hobby channel, which is specifically what a lot of this data is from, right? Obviously, collectible games have a disproportionate slice of the pie. So even if the average, local retail space was divided directly how this data is divided, so half collectible, you break it down all the way. If you took collectible games out, then anyone whose math looks like that would collapse, right? It would absolutely collapse. I think the other interesting thing for me about that kind of sentiment is part of the problem of collectible games, given the price of entry and the cost of manufacturing and the cost of buying as a consumer, is that basically if you have 1 million tabletop game players, and there's way more than that, only so many of them are going to play collectible games. And the people that do play them can only play so many collectible games, probably one.
And
so
unless they're a billionaire.
unlike board games where someone could feasibly buy
one a month.
A lot of games.
Yeah.
And that list could shake up. Like someone could come in and really shake that list up, whether it's a Kickstarter or whatever. There can actually only be so many successful collectible games based on the size of the entire player base.
Unless we get a huge influx of players.
That's kind of where I'm leading to, which is I think that the next real challenge for the hobby market is not, because for a long time we saw it in the 2000s late 90s, early 2000s, collectible games coming out every week, right? Buffy the collectible game.
It was very similar to like cryptocurrencies these days. Or it's just like a total speculation boom on a thing that if it goes, it'll make you a lot of money.
If you became one of the Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, right? If you became one of the games that stuck, it would huge
Which is what
potential.
Spoils tried to do. Too late, but
you
they
heard
tried
it in
to do
the Destiny community all this year, especially when there were supply issues going on. It's like, how am I supposed to protect my investment?
Yeah,
all this kind of stuff.
It was all about the investment.
Yeah, so
in a lot of ways, that is the buyer mentality.
Yeah, and that's where I think to me is if during that gold rush, it was how can we get the Magic players or the Yu-Gi-Oh players to convert to our game, right? And there was a lot of that kind of thing. But I'm hopeful, and this is what we're doing on our end as well. And I mean, you see this with some people at the retail level, whether it's cafes or board game models, or they're trying new things. But the short version is, if we can find a way to get more people in that aren't already in, it opens up a lot of opportunity. Whether or not that's collectible games or not, I don't know. That's the case, right? If we could double the number of people playing games,
just get your foot in the door.
You would also need to have better economics on some of these other types of games. Like for instance, if as a role-playing game publisher, you could find a way to make twice as much money or increase your sales by 100% by doing something different with the product or different with distribution, then that model could be totally successful.
Sure.
But like the economics of collectible games are so strong, I think you'd have to have equally strong economics with some other category to support what is currently going on.
Yeah, and I think we're already starting to see some of this with even board games or role-playing games where they'll continue putting things out for the same game, where you have the expansions coming out. Why is Catan still on this list 18 years later?
Yeah.
And I think a large part of that is the expansions. We've seen, I think Dark Souls is a great example. They have a ton of expansions lined out. And so we'll see how that goes. But, collectibles are obviously a very important part.
I'll tell you the other thing that is sticking to me throughout all of this is actually how young the industry still is.
Yeah.
Very young. And really, if you look at it, so I've kind of looked at a couple of the histories. You have WizKids, which starts with the FASA, which is a Battletech. That's Jordan Wiseman. So they do that thing the 1980s, and then breaks off, forms WizKids with like Ray Weirs and these guys who goes on to do Calliope. And they do that thing, they do WizKids, they do the Clicks model, and then they get bought by Topps, and then Topps just continues them, and they get bought by NECA, the Collectible Association. and are now still going. So that's essentially one person kind of ending up doing so much of the main work in the industry. On the other end, you've got Games Workshop that starts their line, and then you have D&D and Wizards of the Coast that starts their line.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been, those are the early movers. I mean, that's the first 20 to 30 years of just trying to figure out what this market is all about. And now I think is the first time that we're seeing, aside from maybe the collectible boom in the 90s, a real energy and innovation cycle happening, not just about like how can we make a better game, but like how can we change formats up? How can we distribute differently? Do we need certain elements of the retail channel? Do we need distribution? Like Kickstarter's cutting that out now. So we're in a super exciting time. And are there new formats? Can we have a non-collectible game or a different type of collectible game?
Can there even be a category that we're not talking about that gets invented?
Right.
A whole new
this
paradigm shift.
quasi-digital business that's going on. You know, is that a new frontier?
And I think that's where collectible games before Magic weren't even on the charts.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole category. So, and that's where I'm excited to see it if someone does do that, which is come up with a new category of game. Those are hard. It's hard to do that because going from 0 to 1 is difficult. So, all right, there you have it.
It's the state of things now.
State of tabletop.
Keep an eye on things.
That is right.
Go?
So we're going to answer one question real quick before we cut out of here. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant to get your questions answered right here on the show. This is from Nathan Souder. Is that how you would say that? And he says, well, since you're finally coming back to the podcast, it seems to be a good time to ask Covenant, what's an intellectual property missing from tabletop that you'd like to see? What's an underdeveloped or poorly developed IP that you'd like to see improved?
I got mine.
Yeah.
We'll kick it off with you.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
It's 4 letters.
It starts with a D, ends with a Dune.
Yeah, Dune. Everybody who's ever been playing on board games or any kind of tabletop game knows that that's like the holy grail of all the titles that has just never been tapped. And if they could ever do it, particularly if they were in LCG, I think that would be fantastic.
Could you do a cooperative Dune LCG? At this point, I'm almost certain that I want my LCGs to be cooperative.
I agree. I think
we saw the numbers with Arkham too.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case.
Dune would shoot right to the top of that list if it ever came out.
Yeah. It could be cooperative, you think?
Well, I mean, a clever person, and there are plenty of them out there, will find a way if they so desire.
Yeah.
It might fit better with a competitive just because of the way the universe is structured, but Dune, give it to me.
Do you have anything on your radar? I have one if you're not ready.
Go ahead. I'll think through it a little bit.
I'm probably going to rob the one you would have eventually come up with, but I actually think that the superhero category has been very underutilized, whether that's a cooperative LCG or,
Clicks ain't doing enough for you?
HeroClix. So the thing is, I think HeroClix and Versus were great for their time.
Okay.
We played Mage Knight originally, and then I played a little bit of HeroClix up front. But you compare HeroClix to models in a miniature game or models in like an X-Wing, and they're just not even on the radar.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so the idea of a pre-painted miniatures game as Heroes is if you can pull that off, sweet. But also on the card game front, it's like Versus to me very much feels like a 2000s game.
Sure.
And so I would love a cooperative, competitive, it doesn't matter.
A reboot. Or something
hero game, right? You can imagine like Arkham, you have your investigator.
Yeah.
So if you had your hero, and it's like you're getting, I got my hammer, or I got my thing, and my superpower, and it can even be like non-specific heroes, but...
Think about your signature cards as like your superpower, and then your weakness.
Then your weakness, I got the kryptonite, dang
it's
it.
So good.
Yeah, it's like, oh no.
So good.
That would definitely be the IP I would love to see developed.
I would say that... I think if I'm looking at just kind of the overall space, I want a new IP to start to really be exciting during our lives. Right? We've been rehashing the same old Star Wars and Pokemon.
So would that be exclusive to the game, or is it like some new IP comes along?
I want a brand new world that is as explorable as something like a Star Wars.
So like the next Star Wars,
or the next
Lord of the Rings.
And honestly, and I've said this a million times, I think that Android could do it in terms of just the way that the interest in the universe, especially as it kind of connects to our current situations, the mythos of it, kind of the way it's just the whole way it works, I think is extremely captivating. It's something that isn't in existence in one of the big major IPs with these mega corporations and this dystopian thing going on. So I think I could do it. I really do think that you could see, 30 years from now, you have Android movies and role-playing books and the entire
Netflix
thing.
show or whatever we're watching.
Exactly. As a setting, but
there's actually
I know it's pretty difficult.
A Netflix cyberpunk original series coming soon, kind of like a Mr. Robot style. I don't know if it's that or
Mr.
not.
Robot, bring it on.
And you actually mentioning that makes me want to say one last IP before we jet out of here, which is I also would not be offended by another try at kaiju.
Oh yeah, big monsters.
Sure.
Bring it on.
Because especially with like all the Godzilla movies that have been coming out and King
was a
Kong,
gem.
I would love to see a King Kong movie that I love.
And we know that FFG is capable of making miniatures of the quality like with X-Wing. I bet they could pull off monsters.
Big monsters. And
Totally.
Sure.
Or if Privateer wanted to actually climb the charts again, maybe they could just start reprinting the game.
A non-collectible Monster Apocalypse. Yeah, I would love to see Monpoc again. All right, there you have it again. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We will answer your questions right here on the show. And we'd like to exit, like we said at the beginning, with a question for you. What changes would you like to see to the state of tabletop over the next couple of years? Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep playing.